Climate Justice, moderated by Alexandria, founder and executive director of Earth Uprising. Over to you. Let's give her a virtual round of applause as she kicks off the third and amazing panel.
Yes, so thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. So hi everyone, I'm Alexandria Senor. I'm a 15-year-old climate activist from New York City. I'm a Fridays for Future organizer and the founder of Earth Uprising International, a climate education organization. In this past year, the world has seen an uprising of youth activism surrounding climate action and social justice. However, this activism is not new. Youth have been leading the way for change since the early 19th century when children were workers, and then through the social and cultural changes in the 1950s and 60s, all the way through to today with amazing global leaders such as Malala and the Parkland students. Youth activism is even more important now with our futures increasingly being fraught with peril. Our generation will be affected the most by global issues like climate change, rising political instability, and economic inequality. Youth are taking responsibility for our futures and leading the way for the change that needs to be made. So today we have an exciting panel for you with 4 amazing youth leaders from around the world to discuss youth activism. So I'm going to pass it over and let them introduce themselves. Please correct me if I pronounce anything wrong. So how about we start with Miali to introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everybody. I am Miali Subniana from Madagascar YMCA. I've been volunteering at the YMCA since 2016, and I am very happy to be here to talk with you guys, and see you.
Awesome. How about we pass it over to Alvin?
大家好 Hello, I'm Alvin Khan from Hong Kong. I'm a town planner by profession and a volunteer at the YMCA. I'm very happy to be here to discuss with you the future we want, climate and resiliency, and especially, very importantly, health and the city at this time with COVID-19. Thank you.
Awesome. Silke?
Hello all together. My name is Silke. I'm a student in global change management, and I'm a volunteer in the YMCA and a member in the YMCA's resource group on environment together with Alvin and Alexal. And I'm also a co-leader in the working group of climate education. Thank you for having me.
And Jael?
Hi, my name is Alicia. You can call me Excel. I'm from Mexico City. I have been part of the YMCA as a volunteer for more than 20 years now. I have been co-leading, along with Silke here, the Climate Education Working Group of the RGE from the World YMCA. I'm so happy to be part of this panel, along with this amazing group of young people here, including you, Alexandria. And I'm willing to answer all of your questions. Thanks to the World YMCA for the opportunity, and I hope you all enjoy the panel. Thanks.
Great. So I was thinking we jump right into this discussion, and Jael, let's start with you. One aspect in the climate movement that is very important is social justice. And I believe that you cannot get climate action without focusing on equity. So in your perspective, and considering your background working on gender mainstreaming on climate-related projects, I would love to hear a little more about your work. And do you think the COVID pandemic has a gender gap?
Well, thanks. Yes, I have been working on mainstreaming gender perspective into climate-related projects like the RED mechanism in Mexico, and some other like the National Strategy on Biodiversity. And well, just as the climate crisis, and I'm going to say, yes, this pandemic definitely has a gender gap, but let's try to understand why. It's not that the coronavirus can discriminate estrogen from progesterone and decide somehow to affect more one sex to the other. That not make any sense. But according to the most recent available data, men seem to represent the majority of coronavirus deaths worldwide, even though globally men and women contract the virus in relatively equal numbers. So let's see why. This is one gender gap, the disparities, evident disparities between male and female deaths. Still not knowing exactly why. There are some hypotheses include that men are more likely to practice unhealthy habits, including smoking and drinking, for example. Also, I read in some place that men are less likely to wash their hands and less likely to use soap. Also, men could also be more prone to underlying health problems that affect them more in this pandemic, and some other issues related to habits and social norms. So we have this gender gap affecting more men than women. But let's see in the other side, this pandemic is putting on evidence the inequalities faced by women and girls. Which ones? For example, women are disproportionately affected by poverty worldwide. So the job losses and the economic contraction is going to affect them the most. Women also are more likely to assume the greatest burden of care during the lockdown period. For example, childcare or elder care at homes or even in residential facilities, hospital care for infected patients. Most of care and domestic, unpaid, by the way, work relies on women. It's maybe the group that will be most affected by the loss of informal jobs, informal employment, like house cleaners, carers, etc. There's evidence that women are being most affected by the lack of access to safe family planning methods. Sadly, are being more affected by domestic violence. And the list can go on and on. So definitely the measures to combat the coronavirus and the recovery plans must be gender responsive. Otherwise, they will exacerbate the existing inequalities.
Yeah, great points. I think that I agree with that 100%. One thing that the United Nations, Jayathma, who's just on here, talks about a lot is one of the best ways to combat the climate crisis is by educating women. So that is all great points. And turning over to you now, Silke, right now there are a lot of communities who don't have the resources they need to properly.
We lost your sound there, Alexandra. And we have time for like 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Maybe I can answer in the interim time until Alexandria finds her voice back. And in case you can speak again, you can also fulfill like the question and the question. I had a lot of thoughts when I was thinking about how to prepare this webinar, and I thought like I could talk about the webinar that we have in our own group. Like we have our own webinar series about climate negotiations in our working group on climate education that I'm co-leading with Excel together. And also there's a campaign introduced by members of YMCA on sustainable food at negotiations. But I chose to speak about corona-related topics since it's really timely. And since I'm from Germany and I'm a member and secretary in the working group on international cooperation in Northern Germany, we are launching a campaign today on global solidarity on the topic of corona. Because in a lot of countries, people are really hardly affected by corona effects, like losing their jobs or not being able to go outside of the home because then there might be a risk of getting infected. So there are a lot of projects fulfilled by YMCAs across the world to help affected communities. And in our YMCA, Northern Germany, we're launching this campaign to help those people that are affected by the crisis. It's a social media campaign And if you want to know more about that, you can always text me. And the thing works like you get nominated by a friend, for example, and you're invited to cook a recipe with 5 ingredients of your choice. And since the message is you have a recipe, you have a nice meal that you can post in your status, for example, on WhatsApp or other social media. And you will also share that meal with another person in the global YMCA world by donating a few euros or dollars, or depending on your region. And the YMCA has prepared wonderful campaign sites. Like for the German case, I know the German webpage, YMCA Germany has a campaign call on its webpage, but also the World YMCA has prepared some webpage on that where you can find more information, also donation web pages, and it would be cool if you could engage with that campaign.
All right. For interest of time, we're going to pass it back to Alexandria because we do have about 4 minutes for you to still answer questions before we open it to Q&A. So passing it back to you, Alexandria.
Awesome. So moving on to Alvin, I had a question for you. So cities and urban areas are more densely populated and are at greater risk for climate-fueled disasters. So given your work in this area, can you tell us about how cities can become low carbon and urban areas can become more resilient to climate change?
That's quite a big topic, but I would like to talk about one of the examples that I think of how we can deal with COVID-19 or some public health emergency. At the same time, we are doing low carbon cities. So in urban design, we try to design cities that is pedestrians and bicycle friendly. So that can actually enhance our city livability and also improve the quality of our public health. Because we can walk to a place or cycle to a place easier, and that means that we can have better accessibility to sports and recreational facilities. So this can help to increase our physical fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness, and also muscular strength. And at the same time, I think this can reduce our syndrome for depression. So we can, at the same time, fighting for climate change. Also, at the same time, we're fighting for COVID-19 in a more environmental friendly way.
Alexandra, next question. Before
sorry, my internet isn't that stable right now. So, so the last question before we pass it over, Miali, when we were talking in the chat, you mentioned how one of your clubs, you were doing a lot at YMCA, working with young people and raising awareness, which I think is amazing. But you also talked about how it's changed to online now during the pandemic. So how has everything at YMCA changed around that, especially since quarantine, and how are you still striving for change?
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandria. So here at the Madagascar YMCA, we are working through different clubs and where young people are gathering and doing activities. So one of these clubs is called Y Urban Clubs. They are promoting recycling to try to reduce plastic waste and fight against climate change. So normally they are reaching schools and the local communities for that. Now that we are in lockdowns for 2 months now, it was quite a big issue for us. So we began to work online from home, and as we know, like most of the people are spending their times online on social media, we trying to raise awareness on social media about how can we get preventive action on COVID-19 with considering the climate change, for example, to use renewable masks. The issue is that like not everybody are has internet access here in Madagascar, and it's a big issue that increased the gap between different society layers. So my thought is that we have to try to think about those marginalized people as in Madagascar, like vulnerable, marginalized people are the ones that cause the most environmental deterioration through, for example, charcoal production, as more than 80% of Malagasy people households are using charcoal, for example. So these are different kind of situation here in Madagascar. But at the same time, as I am saying that the carbon footprint of the was like actually people are making digital cleanup day, digital campaign as everybody are moving to using internet. And then here I have some statistics that the carbon footprint of the internet and the systems supporting it account about 3.7% of global greenhouse emissions, which is similar to the amounts produced globally by the airline industry. And some studies estimate that in a decade, the internet network will produce 20% of the world's greenhouse gases. So these are kind of contrasted between different climate justice campaign in over the world and in Madagascar as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So we will now be going over to a Q&A. So I will pass it over to you, Christine.
All right, and before we pass it on to questions, can we please get a round of applause for Alexandria for moderating this conversation? And just to make sure you guys are aware who she is, she's one of the youngest activists. I know a lot of people know about Greta, but she's the New Yorker that kicked off this movement for the youth. So, you know, as a New Yorker, I gotta represent the love. Can we give a virtual round of applause for Alexandria for moderating this conversation? Because climate change is a problem. Climate change is something that we can change in our generation. It's amazing to see all of you, Alvin, Sike, Mayai, all having commentary on this. It was amazing to hear you. Thank you so much for your insights. So now let's jump into Q&A. We got a lot of Q&A coming in on this. First one coming in from John Ray Luciano. How can we ensure that climate action initiatives will be sustainable and attainable even for developing countries? Who wants to take this one? I guess I'll pass it to probably Alexandria, and you are moderating the conversation. So let's see if you could give your first response on this question.
Yeah, of course. So in Earth Uprising, I gotten to work with a lot of people all around the world. And one thing we're starting to focus a lot on, especially in 2020, is how to have young people in the decision-making area and in the solutions. So I was actually at COP25 in Madrid. And so it was amazing to see young people finally able to be in these rooms with all of our politicians. And for a lot of young people, it was our first ever COP, of course, and the first time we were able to be there. And so we saw a lot how everything worked, and we realized just how much young people have to be firsthand when it comes to legislation and decision-making, because a lot of the time our politicians only think about what is politically possible, and they usually, some countries at the negotiations at COP especially were blocking the negotiations. So young people have to be there putting pressure for certain legislation. And so I think that it's important for young people, especially in those countries, to have a voice in what is happening in their political system, because they know what's happening there first and foremost and what needs to happen. And so I think that one way to make sure that legislation is sustainable is with having young people there first and foremost.
Amazing. Did anyone else want to jump in on this? Axel or Alvin or Silky? Alvin, you want to jump in?
I try to take this question. I think for young people, not just in developing countries, but everyone, all the young people, or including YMCA or youth organizations, we can try to foster cooperations across different sectors, because climate change is really a big issue that not even one single person can do with it. So we need all the involvement so that we can build a really climate resilient communities. And I think for the future, young people's we want to see a future that is, we have resilient community that can effectively respond to climate, and also for public health emergency. It is very important.
And going into the next question here, how can we engage all sectors of society into motion to pursue climate change or climate action through programs and initiatives? And many of you are climate activists, so what have you, in a sense, been doing to drive this common purpose here? You could hear from Axel, Malai, or Silke.
I would like to take that question. Or Axel, you can go first.
No, you go ahead, Silke.
Okay, then maybe you can add later on. I think it's just really important that all sectors take action on climate action, and every sector has a right and has its necessity to do that. It's not only one sector that has the most impact on anything, but it's all important that we do it all together. And people can be engaged in different sectors. Some, we said earlier, you need to find, or the purpose needs to find you, right? And once the purpose found you and you are aware of your talent, you should use your talent and make it be fruitful for climate action. Some maybe can paint wonderfully, some others have a loud voice, some others are good in writing text. So you should really use your talent and use that gift that was given to you for climate action, I think. And that can happen in different sectors, of course. I pass it to Excel.
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with you, Silke. And I'm thinking that we must be responsible. All sectors must be responsible in their own way. We should act in a preventive basis, not just react to the circumstances, because we are seeing now how the economic system is almost collapsing because we are changing our habits of consumption and production. So this puts us in the opportunity to build a new normality, and this new normality will make different sectors to play their roles differently. So we now have the opportunity to realize a low carbon economy. We can actually achieve a sustainable development, and different sectors, all sectors play a different role, but we all must seek the same goal, that is sustainable development. This is actually an opportunity and not a crisis, I guess.
And final question here before we transition to the next panel, and I think this one will be coming from me personally because this is such a dynamic panel. I'd like to ask you guys that you guys really just informed us about climate change. I want you to inspire us, because there's a lot of young people on this session that want to be inspired about the actions you took to activate people around the world on the issue of climate change. Tell us really briefly in 60 seconds, what happened the night before you took action, before you became a climate activist? How can people be inspired by the first action you took to be in this position to inspire all of us on this call today? All of you, please give us a 60-second response. Who wants to go first?
Sure, I can start. So the first ever action I took was going on climate strike on December 14th of 2018, and that started my activism, and that's how I felt like I could take an action and make my voice heard. So the night before I did that, what I was doing is I was making a sign thinking that, what am I doing? I've never been to a protest before, but I went out there and I did it, and it was probably the best decision of my life.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. The night before, who's next?
Okay, so maybe instead of answering question that about my long history, I would like to talk about one thing that I did recently. So I will try to link climate change or environments together with fighting COVID-19 together. How can we fight COVID-19 in a more environmental friendly way? So I was a bit worried considering the amount of bleach, detergents, and sanitizer we used in Hong Kong. So I was going around to ask people, saying that actually we don't need to use so much bleach. We can just use water to put into the U-trap drainage in Hong Kong or in the building so that they can serve the same purpose. And the second actions I did is, rather than giving out some one-off face masks, we try to use some reusable masks. So I joined with some friends to make some reusable masks. So this is one of them that can be used for more than 60 times. So that is one of the ways that we can fight two things at the same time.
All right, couple seconds left. Axel?
Well, I have to say that I actually do not remember exactly what I was doing then before. I'm not even sure what was my first activism activity on climate change, but I can say that it's because it's developing with you, and while you're growing as a person and as a professional, suddenly you're in the middle of a climate negotiation, making youth voices heard. So doesn't need to be something as planned as a tomorrow I'm going to do this and this and this. Maybe it's not a checklist. Maybe it's just going with your passions, going with your thoughts, and just do it. It happens anyway.
Couple seconds left.
Okay,
Bye.
okay. So yeah, so what I can't remember as well, but what I was thinking is like when I was seeing all around of me that people are just littering everywhere, I was thinking, okay, if it's not me, who will tell these people, who will engage them of doing the right things? So if I will always just see what is happening and not act, not tell, not speak, so who will do that? Who will still live in this even 100 years later? So that is why I was thinking like, I have to do it.
If not me, then who? Amazing. Suki, you have the final word.
Okay, I will take that. I think for me, it was not one night of discovering that I need to take action, but it was more like a slow process. Like I learned about climate change at an age of 14 or something, I think. That was like some years back. And I think for me, it was crucial to really realize that I have skills that I can use for climate action, and also have a mindset of not caring what others might think about that, because I have my own opinion and I want to do what I need to do in my opinion. So I think that's the basic message, to really do what you're convinced about to do.